All right. We're live. Welcome, everybody. We're the Bevry community. We're here to discuss John Vervaeke's lectures 18, 19, and 20. Really just the core end of lecture 18. And then we'll get into 19 and 20. And I don't know. We'll kind of see how the discussion goes. But anyway, I'm John. I'm joined here with Brett, or Pleasure of Doubt, and also Nick. Hi, Nick. It looks like your full name is on the Zoom channel. I don't know if you're all right with doxing that or not.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. I mean, it's already up there, but okay, cool. Yeah. So how do we want to go about this? Because it seemed like, I don't know, these lectures were almost like a recapping, like a very quick condensation of a couple of thinkers in history, and not so much their main ideas.
Yeah, if you want, I could summarize just sort of the end of episode 18 and what he talks about. Sure. With Plotinus and what is real. So he starts off by asking what makes something real, and asks, how much time do we put into that, and how much time do we think about what really does make something real. And that he says, if we're driven by a pursuit of realness but we don't understand what it is, there's a gap of bullshit. So it's important to really spend some time on this. So for Plotinus, how we sense what is real is how organized it is, how one it is, how integrated it is, how structurally, functionally organized it is. So the more structural, the more structured, the more functional, the more organized something is, the more real Plotinus would say it is. And I have some comments on that, but let me just finish the summary. So when we understand something, we see it as one. So even if it's a group of things, so even like a business or corporation, we would see it as one. We would say that's real. We understand how it's integrated together. So the more integrated, the more real. And as we try and find the more, what he said, as we go deeper, the more underlying principles that integrate things together, we become more integrative together, and we become more real. That's the theory. So we are realized, we are more actualized, and we become more real.
Yeah, that was kind of where he was bringing in, rather than the addictive death spiral that he had pointed out a couple of lectures before in regards to like addictions and alcoholism, where people will focus in on this very limited frame of looking at the world, or like if they're addicted to something, or if they have PTSD, where they'll get into this frame of identity, and then because that frame that they use makes it so they're less capable of acting out in the world, their arena kind of gets smaller, like that agent arena relationship, where their arena gets smaller, and then because the arena is smaller, their identity, it becomes smaller within that as well. And so you're less capable of doing anything until you just kind of bottom out. There's kind of the inverse of that, like that we can kind of see with Plotinus, of where your which I think is his or Plato's use of the Greek term anagoge, where your interaction with a thing gets you a better understanding of what it is. And by having that better understanding, you're changed so that you're going to interact with it now in a different way. And it's going, I wonder if there's like something I can concretize this analogy with. I guess like reading a book, maybe, where you read a book, and when you're, without having any sort of base understanding of the author or the characters or what the plot even is, you're not going to understand it very well. But when you put in that time and effort to actually read the book, your understanding of the characters and like their motivations is going to change, and to the point where the things in the book make more sense to you. I guess in a way, feel more real, because that's kind of the thing. Like if you're watching a movie and you don't understand a character's motivations, it feels off. Like it feels like, oh, this was badly written. But when you have that understanding of like the motivations behind things, you see, oh, this rings true, even if it's a fictional story, but it still has some sort of basis in reality that we can understand and comprehend.
Yeah, well, I mean, he says, it becomes more real, and as I'm becoming more integrated, that allows me to make it more viable, and then therefore more real and more integrated to what he says, deeper levels of reality. To me, like I see, I almost think it's mixing up viability with realness. Like something can be real and not viable to me. Like I just have no idea about it. It's not, I don't know about it, but it's still real. Like when something, we could say, yes, the more we understand something, the more integrated it is, the more real in the one sense, but we mean we can use it more, we can understand it more, it's more viable to us. But the parts of it are still real. A house is made of bricks, and we'll say a house is real, it's integrated as a whole, but it's still made of individual bricks, which are just as real, which are made of individual particles, which are just as real. So I'm not sure I buy this use of the word real, but I get it. In a practical sense, I get it. Like but that to me is just viability more than realness. I don't know what you guys.
And so I would also come from the opposite direction, which is to say, personally, many of the experiences I would grant the highest degree of perceived reality to were absolutely mysterious.
Right.
They didn't have there was no integration in any tool-like sense, but rather it almost felt reality imposed itself upon me.
It's sort of a way that left you
at this point, but
kind
it's
of
not
left you unable to really explain it or even know how to practically apply it.
So it was viable to you without an understanding of how integrated it is. Is that?
It was viable to me. It's almost like it was viability breaking. Where, what would you say? It's almost breaking the frames in which you were drawing the connections between things. Now, you could describe that then as something that's ultimately connected, or you could describe it as something that is not connected whatsoever. So it's...
Are you comfortable talking a little more about it? It's hard to grasp, sort of. I mean, I have some vague idea, but
yeah. Well, it's almost like a question of which perceptual systems is one relying on to perceive a sense of reality. Is it is it impressionistic, or is it reflective? So is it something that is immediate there that you're perceiving, or is it what you perceive after the fact upon reflection of something? So it's almost dealing with that kind of like mind-body separation. Is it something that is knowable, something traceable through the mind, or is it more I don't know what the right word is, fundamental or something like that?
Or I mean, you're talking sort of about insight, like when you sort of get it later, where you sort of see something. You're like sometimes with these lectures. I mean, I'll hear the lecture, I'll listen to it, I'll even take notes, and then hours later, I'll be like, I get it. I get what he's talking about.
Sure, that's one example. Yes, absolutely. I would say that's an example. So in that case, right, with that interpretive framework, you can, in a sense, use realness in the way,
right? It's more
was describing.
It's more viable to you. Like you get it more, you grasp it more, you have more of a hold on it. But that's what I sort of mean by viable. But let's just say this: like think about an iPhone. I can have my iPhone and I can have no idea how it works, versus the iPhone maker who understands how all the parts fit together now. So in a sense, the iPhone maker really understands it in a far deeper level than I do. But the iPhone that I'm holding seems just as real to me as it probably does to the, as the iPhone maker.
You also have another quality, which is what is the most real part of the iPhone? Is it the components and the things it's made out of, or is it the integration with it as a tool? So is it just the matter that it's made out of? Is that what reality is? I would argue that's not very real, and both at the phenomenological level and literally at the physical level.
But hold on, why would you say it's not real? Like it,
because there's more to it than just the particles. So like you can have the particles that
context.
Yeah, you can have the particles that compose your phone, but the particles are arranged in such a manner that I can use it as a phone. Right. If the same particles were like, I don't know, all across the universe, it wouldn't have this unifying aspect to it that could make it feasible or viable as a tool at all. And so like, sure, you can say everything's base level reality is particles, but there's still differing arrangements of those particles which are important and useful to talk about. So that
and those arrangements are real though. Like they're actually integrating, they're actually doing stuff, they're actually related together. So what I mean is not that I don't think it, I would say, why is it less real? Why not it's a different type of realness, a different side of the coin, that it's not or, it's and. It's not that that's not that real, but here's the real part. That's real, but so is seeing it as a whole. Like we call it sort of layers of abstraction. We can look at the iPhone as a whole, or we can look at it at its parts. I mean, if your iPhone is suddenly broken and there's a part that needs to be fixed, suddenly, the parts of the iPhone become very salient to you, right? Or, if you drop it and there's a crack in the screen, before you weren't really thinking about the screen on its own, but now you are, because there's a crack in it. So
I see. So maybe this can even tie into kind of your I guess pushback against Vervaeke, in that like he's putting forward this position that people care about what is most real, but really I don't know, maybe I'm extrapolating a little bit. The people only care about what's most real in regards to themselves. Like the internal mechanisms of the phone doesn't matter to me at all. So the realness to the phone elements are, irrelevant.
And that's what I think he means by viable or salient. What's salient to me, what's viable to me. That to me seems to be more what they're talking about than realness. I mean, if real means just in accordance with reality, I mean, I guess that's, when you talk about even the process, he talks about, actualization, and we think of potential to actual, which we've talked about a few times before. We think of the acorn growing into a tree. Well, at every stage of that growth, there's real things there. There's a real seed, and then I don't know what you call each stage of development, but it grows into a little shrub, and then it gets bigger and bigger, and it's not only once the tree is fully formed that it's real, that it's actualized. At every stage, it's actualized. It's just at a different stage of actualization. It's just a different pattern. And why would we say one pattern is less real than the other? It's not noise. Right? Each stage isn't noise. The iPhone's not noise. We'll come to this a bit when we come to Eckhart. So maybe I'll save that. But where he was talking about, the books, there's not really a book there. It's just a bunch of parts, and we make the book, which is true. Anyway, let's save it for when we get to Eckhart.
But yeah, maybe we can get it. Okay, so maybe just to, I guess, carry on from there so that we can get back to the discussion of nominalism. So from Augustine, who's kind of figured out this or set the groundwork for the medieval worldview, and then there was Aquinas that followed after him. And Aquinas, I guess, follows more so in the Aristotelian kind of. Well, okay, the one thing that Vervaeke really brings up that's interesting is the transition from reciting of books in a verbal sense and in sort of a community sense as well, as like you're reading a book for the people that are probably mostly illiterate, so that they can get a understanding of a book without actually having to put in the work themselves.
Was it Lectos Divina? Is that what he is it Lectos Divina? Is that what it was called?
Possibly. I don't know exactly, but he was talking about how there's kind of this transition that occurred between reading out loud and reading personally for oneself.
Sorry,
and
Lectio Divina.
Hmm.
Lectio Divina. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. So with the change, there's kind of this transition even alongside that of, rather than taking information and you applying it in regards to one's life and one's larger, broader world, there's more so the like using the information within a text in regards to propositions and definitions that we already have in a very kind of Aristotelian sense. Like you read Aristotle and it's just like dense with hard definitions, and it's not very readable at all, at least compared to Plato, who writes all of his philosophy in dialogues. It's just very much a I don't know, straightforward. Well, it's not straightforward. It's very complex, I guess, like building up from all of his previous definitions. And yeah, you can see that with Aquinas as well. Like if you read the Summa Theologica, he brings from, okay, so like in scripture, there's this verse that says X. And then over here, we have this, I don't know, early church father that says the opposite of X. Now we have a contradiction here. So how do we kind of work these two contradictions into something that actually makes sense? So, this is what the early church father was saying in such a way that still coheres with the passage from scripture. So rather than applying, I guess, the understandings of what's being said in regards to the broader, I don't know, life, living out in being, it's turning towards like the inside the text, so that it has a contextual coherency with itself, so that the Bible, the ancient Hebrew Bible, is in coherence and agreement with, like, say, Saint Augustine or Thomas Aquinas or the other people, so that there is this internal coherency rather than this, I guess, broader living coherency that was, I guess, understood with the age or the framing of like speaking verbally. Now, I think I'm probably going a bit too far, but since it was really just kind of a offhand discussion that Vervaeke had for the lecture, but I at least found it interesting.
He thought it was pretty important in how we approach, like our way of approaching reading radically changed. Like he described the old model of thought, where thought is conforming to the world. It was more gnostic, gnosis, anagoge, and self-transformation. So knowing is a way of being and becoming. Whereas the new model of thought was knowing is to have coherent propositional language. And so thinking is to have a coherent set of propositions in your head. The self is in your head, inside your beliefs. And so the shift opened up the world, and it opened up, science. It was very reason focused. It opened up a whole different way of thinking, but it also, so he said it empowers argumentative skills, but it also, we lost something too. We lost that psychotechnology of what he calls the psycho-spiritual existential transformation, which is a really jargon-filled term, but I get the sense that, he was talking about reading being more participatory, that you would read, it was the Bible they mostly read, and you would put yourself like in that world. You would, I guess, imagine what they were doing, what they were saying, you were trying to become part of what they're going through.
It's kind of interesting because, like, if you actually go through the practice of reading a book out loud versus reading a book internally within your own internal monologue, it's almost like you're the passive recipient to the reading it out loud, maybe, or like you're the, I guess, vessel for communicating the book itself.
You're channeling.
Yeah, kind of like you're channeling. Whereas when you're the reader, you're very much in control, because like you're I mean, sure, you're still reading it either way, but it's
no, I got like when I was in university, one way I often studied, and I'm not sure how I started to come to do this, but I would I guess stand in front of a mirror almost, and I would read or sometimes even sing my notes to learn. You know, as I was trying to memorize them, I would say them aloud, and like I was giving a presentation. Like, you know, so like when I used to memorize speeches for a presentation, I would sort of recite my notes that way. It talks a lot about recital. So I guess I was probably doing something of this, like you do sort of, because when you're reciting something, you put feeling into it. Like if I'm just reading this, if I'm just reading like just these notes, I read these notes over before I started the notes I did for this lecture, and now I just started talking about it. And there's a difference in how I just read it quickly in my head. When you're talking about it, you're trying to there's emphasis. You're really trying to think of the meaning. You're trying to be more expressive. So you're really interacting in a much more real way, integrated way with what you're reading. And it's true. I think when you read in your head, you lose some of that.
Yeah. It's almost like when you externalize it into a note or a book, it's like gives you the freedom, I guess, to forget things and then remember them when you look back at that. Like, oh, I don't need to memorize X because I can just check Wikipedia or something like that. Whereas prior to that, like I think even Socrates had this kind of critique of the written word, was that like you would have the epics of like Homer that were performed in like a poetic style where they were like singing or reciting these like long mythological stories that had kind of this broader like abstracted symbolic understanding that can be helpful for a lot of people, like the characters within the epics, and like getting I guess a more rooted understanding within our living bodies rather than a inert thing, which we might get into later inside of a book, which can be kind of passively left alone until it's needed.
And he has a good point that we have lost this. And it's not to say that reading in your head is bad, because like he says, it leads to a whole lot of great things, including, you know, science.
An explosion of knowledge that no one man could be able to because that's kind of the thing in the old days with like people like Aristotle. He was a polymath, and since there was so little kind of understanding out there, Aristotle had the capacity to know the entirety of human knowledge that was available at that time. And so like biology, philosophy, mathematics, engineering, and rhetoric and ethics, all these things were kind of available to him. But now there's because of the psychotechnology of being able to write things down and kind of put them aside until they're necessary, we have the ability to like have the world's knowledge at our fingertips, even though it was built up from people from very discontinuous cultures and like personal lives as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So, I mean, I guess the point is we should try to do a little bit more of this participatory. I think what we're doing now is kind of a version of it, where we're, you know, we've listened to the lectures, we've taken our own notes sometimes, but talking it through, you participate in these ideas more. Like I always come away from our talks having a bit more insight than I did before, and it's not that, you know, we're talking about the same stuff I just spent, you know, a day looking at, but in talking it through. And I've always been a fan of the dialectic. I've never been a fan of just like, I don't tend to get my best insights just studying on my own. So I always like, I get them often in interacting with people and responding to people. So there's something to this that maybe we should think about just trying to bring back, at least in some sense. So
it's interesting too, because you can almost trace I don't know if cultural movements is the right way to phrase it, but worldview movements from pre-modern, which is based in the spoken word, and then you get into modernism, which was largely birthed from the written word, and then the multiplicity of the written word with the printing press.
Right.
And now we're in a really weird phase where we've got both. So here we are speaking, right? There's a little bit of written word. You guys have some notes. I'm mostly just trying to respond. Yet it's all being recorded and saved so that it can be referenced at a later time. So it's both, right? Except now the written word is in the zeros and ones hidden behind the facade of the spoken word, right? It's
or think of the audio book where we've taken the book, and while we don't read it aloud, but we have a recorded voice reading it to us, and that's again a different way of taking it in.
So that maybe what you brought in there with the zeros and ones, that it's an interesting point that relates back to our opening discussion in regards to what is real. Because if we kind of like take at what's most real, or as the particles or the components to the computer that or the server that in which these conversations are going through and being transferred to each other, then it would be utterly kind of like non-translatable, I guess, to us. Whereas we're like like I'm expressing semantic meaning to you, but it's coming to you not through the air that's, well, I mean, in a way it's coming through the air that's being pushed out of my lungs, but that
it's being mediated through zeros and ones and then spit back to us through the internet.
Yeah. So I don't know, like, I don't know, maybe getting a better understanding of like what we're meaning by real. Because like if what we're meaning by real is just like what's physical, then I mean, meaning to a word that is being spoken, it doesn't really have a physical quantity to it.
No, but see, you said like most real. Like, why does it have to be most real? Why can't it be
real in multiple different ways?
Yes, like there's a structural aspect to it. So that would be the zeros and ones.
Right. Okay. So we can bring back Aristotle then to this. So you can have the efficient cause, or let's see, the efficient cause would be like, what is it doing? Then there's the material cause, like what is it made out of? And then there's the teleological cause, which is like, what is its end? What is its purpose? What is it intention behind it? Or at least what it's gravitating towards. And then there's the formal cause, which is kind of like the structure. So it's like, so if we were to take the phone, it has the material cause, which is the plastics and the silicon and the glass and all those things that it's made up out of. Then there's the efficient cause. This was made by maybe some sweatshop in China or something like that. Then there's the formal cause, which is like the structure of it. Like it's not just like a pile of silicon and glass and electronics in a pile that can blow away. Silica. Yeah. And then there's the then there's the teleological cause. Like it is a phone. I can use this to watch this video right now or something like that. There are the ends in which it can be used towards. So we can think about, like what is most real in regards to maybe those four different things. I mean,
then it's context dependent on the intention of the individual. So you can see you can see why it's almost necessary that you end up with Aquinas and then it moving through Occam.
Yeah.
Right? Because you get this shrinking in where meaning starts falling ever more on the weight of the individual. Right. There is no book except for when you're trying to read it.
Right.
That's what makes it a book. It's your intention interacting with the object that basically takes this flat existence and turns it into a salience field with peaks and valleys.
But isn't that more viability than realness? You know that the book is only meaningful to you. It's only relevant to you, salient to you when you have it, when you're holding your hand. If you've never heard about it, it's irrelevant to you. It's not that it's not real. There is a book out there. There's a bunch of books forgotten on my shelf downstairs that aren't very meaningful to me anymore, but they're there. They're real. Like this is semantics, but I guess, it seems to me that we should have the word real, meaning what, again, what's in accordance with reality, and then viability and meaningful and salient to talk about what's more. I can say this is more salient to me. This is more meaningful to me, even though they're both equally real.
Sure. So you're saying we should keep reality as a perfectly flat field and then use other words to describe the manipulation of that field. There is one problem I see with a move similar to that, at least, which is it gets really easy to overly weight the word real. So there's lots of assumptive depth when we throw about the word real. So it's again, like my inclinations to approach it from a physical basis, because I liked physics a lot as a teenager. But it's like, okay, so we go with, okay, molecules are real. Well, they're not the most real. Atoms are more real.
Okay, right? but pause on that. Why is an atom more real than a molecule? Like what makes one more real? You could say atoms are more fundamental, but is that, yes. I don't know if that's the same as more real.
Is it because atoms can exist even where molecules do not?
And you have like temporal aspects as well. That which lasts longer has more of a sense of reality to it, a deeper sense of permanence. So the problem is that.
But wait, but hold on. Just pause on that. I mean, wouldn't we say that when the atoms, when the particles are in a certain formation, we say that's a molecule. And at some point, they all spread apart and there's no more molecule. So at one point, the molecule is real. And at another point, when the relationship between the particles change, it's no longer real. But it's not, so it's real and not real, not more real and less real.
Okay. So even if we throw out the more real and less real, you still are going to run into the problem that I was highlighting or aiming towards, which is that at some point the whole thing falls apart. So if you keep zooming in, if you keep asking, okay, what are molecules made out of? They're made out of atoms. And then you ask, what are atoms made out of? They're made out of leptons and quarks. And then you ask, what are leptons and quarks made out of? And then you basically end up with bound vibrations of space-time. And then we don't know why they're bound. Right. We don't know what it is. And then we could even ask, well, what's space-time made out of, right? Eventually you get to a point where this seeming reality dissolves absolutely.
No, but what do you mean it dissolved? Because you were asking what questions, and at one point we get to ignorance, right? But that doesn't mean we get to no reality. We can be ignorant, like our knowing what is real is different from there being something real. X can be real, and I can have no clue about it.
Likewise, something can appear very real and not be real at all.
Sure.
So that's what I'm saying. Who are we then to say this is the real thing, especially when our investigation into it shoves in our face that we can't tell the difference between the illusion of reality and reality.
Yeah. Like here's where I go into I'll call myself sort of a skeptic. I'm not big on certainty. I don't like certain. I'm not that I don't like certainty. I don't think certainty is possible in most cases, other than things like I think, therefore I am, that kind of stuff. I don't think our goal is to be certain about that. We do our best. We look for high confidence, and we're always open to changing our mind. So when we say, who are we say, well, we've made this assessment. This is the best evidence we have. We think it's reliable because of this, and this reason. And so until we find we're wrong, and we'll continue to test it, we're going to say, we think this is our best assessment of what is real, rather than just saying this is absolutely real and it can never change. I don't know if this is getting at what you were getting at, but
oh, I think you might have frozen.
oh,
But
I thought he was just so intently
very stoic,
interested.
Oh, no.
Yeah, just staring intently at what I was saying. He was so interested.
Okay,
but,
well,
yeah.
this is maybe we'll get back to it. Okay, yeah.
Is he back, or he's still not moving?
Oh, I have to re-invite him in. Sorry.
Oh, okay. He showed up.
Sorry,
again.
my internet died.
Yeah, that's right.
No.
Okay, so I have one thing I want to kind of comment on, because
Sure.
there's a way in which you can like frame our understanding, like our epistemology of what we regard to be as what is real, like what is our best bet at what is real in regards to how coherent it is within our understanding of the universe, like how in line it is with our expectations and our observations. And then there's the other way that I kind of recently framed on Twitter as like a religious epistemology, which is not really so concerned with the correspondence of our observations with our other observations. More so, it is focused on what is the existential capabilities that a belief or a worldview has before being, I guess, introduced into the epistemological canon, let's say.
Is this sort of the Jordan Peterson version of truth? The
maybe
approach to truth? That sounds sort of like...
kind of, I guess. It's in regards to how sufficient a belief is in regards to providing existential relief in some ways. And that's kind of tied in with a lot of different things. So like it can be like what is necessary in order to build a socially cohesive society, such as like if it is the case, like monogamy maybe being something that is better at providing a socially cohesive society. And so there will be required beliefs in order to better support that because that's kind of the thing, like taking for granted that beliefs that we have will build upon each other to cause us to act in a sort of way in which we already, in what we believe. So if we believe that, let's say, for every man there is to be one woman, let's say that's a presuppositional belief that we have, then we will act in such a way and so as to, like, if that's what we're normatively accepting or being forced upon us for what is a ideal society, that is the way in which we're going to have to act in order to abide by that. But now, of course, that is not really a observational claim that's being made there. It's a normative one, but it is one in which allows for a society to continue to exist and build, or at least continue.
It's an abstract. It's an abstract concept, and I think we have a different approach to abstract concept. But I think they're still real. They're real thoughts. There are real effects to putting them into applying them.
Sure.
So
there's a way in which you can make all the descriptional aspects to how the belief is, like what are the effects of the belief being practiced, and that is one way in which you can, I guess, get a scientific observation of what a religion does, or like what is its function, what is it doing, like what are the psychological components that it's enforcing within its constituents.
We can say, look at this policy, look at this belief, look at how, so monogamy, what effects does having monogamy have in society,
right,
and in the cohesion of a society? And then we could look at another society that has polygamy, mm-hmm. and see what effects that has, and then we can compare them, and then we could now again, I think we're getting to more better or worse rather than
right.
real or not real.
And this is just to point out that I think there is a difference in, I guess, our epistemology for what we're considering to be real or not real. Whereas, so within I'm terming this religious, but I mean, I'm not so sure it's perfectly in correspondence with like how religious things are.
Well, it's almost policy. What you're talking about? You're talking about policy.
Well, it's like a framework.
To break it down, monogamy is a policy.
Yes.
And we have a policy that we implement, right?
So like it's a normative policy. Like we believe that having a monogamous society is more beneficial than a polygamous society for multiple reasons, such as like
yeah, but the way all of this functions is not on a because. That's kind of the trick with moral thinking, which I'm guessing is what you're hitting at with this religious kind of mode of epistemology, which is that it has a upright prescriptive nature that functions very differently than the backwards looking rational mind.
Right.
It looks forwards, not whoops.
Sorry, just can you say that again?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the last part of it looking forward rather than backwards. Well, I guess I can see like if empiricism is
it has
looking
nothing
backwards
behind it to support it. It's just looking into a future and then projecting a reality onto it. It's not basing its sense of the future off of what came before.
Sorry, what is not?
The religious epistemology?
Epistemological mindset.
Is not based on...
there's a way in which I can kind of agree with that, because it's in regards to like what is necessary in order to continue forward into the future.
You're making a blunt statement that does not become something that you get to figure out until way after the prescription has already been made.
That's true.
Monogamy has existed now for thousands of years, so now we get to look backwards and say, oh, look at what it does compared to this other thing, right? But that happens way after the fact. If you're the one person,
we could do it prospectively. We could say, let's do an experiment with policy to say, for the next 10 years, we are going to allow polygamy in our society, and we're going to see the effects. And at the end of the 10-year period, we're going to have a study that's going to say this is what the effects were, and then we're going to make a decision of whether to continue with it or not.
Right. But the thing is, like, not all things only have 10-year cycles of what are the drawbacks or the benefits that are gained. So, like, there's a quote from Nietzsche that's something like, the railroad is a premise whose conclusions will not be known for another century or something like that. So, like, just the idea of, like, okay, we should centrally plan our cities so that there's a central hub where the population congregates, and then everybody kind of focuses all their energy there. That's kind of like an assumed premise of normativity for like what should be the case, in which we're not so sure what the outcomes are going to be until, I don't know, up until the point of extinction. Or
even your example itself, pleasure of doubt, you're creating a prescription for a way to figure out prescriptive statements.
Right.
Yeah. So what's making you do it that way as opposed to some other way? And I could maybe form an argument saying, oh, well, it won't work well if you approach it that way, because what enables a person to have the strength and character to actually solve the problems that would arise coming from a monogamous society into a polygamous one only happens if they truly believe polygamy is the correct answer from the outset. They won't come to the right solutions.
No, I'm not saying, and I wasn't saying forced polygamy. I was saying allowed polygamy.
I just mean that there's something different about the character of this prescriptive religious epistemology that may alter the final results over an experimental one.
So I just want to bring into this what Vervaeke talked about the three components to meaning that we've figured into cognitive science. I think it sort of interrelates. But he talks about coherence, significance, and sense of purpose. And I think this is what we've been talking about more when we're talking about realness. So one, coherence. The more coherent, the more intelligible, the more the thing fits together, the more real and the more meaningful they are to our lives. So again, the more viable, and he calls that's the nomenological order, how things fit together and make sense in a coherent fashion. So that's the Aristotelian, Augustinian world order. And Augustine, he said, hey, I can give a Christian explanation of this, but it's sort of that Aristotelian approach. Significance, how valuable, how deep in reality, how good are the elements in your life. That's the normative order. So we want things to be significant to satisfy he calls the anagogic drives of inner peace and contact with reality. And, that's where, agape can come in, love, and again, Augustine relies on this too. And then the sense of purpose. Does your life have a direction? Is it moving in a course? That's the narrative order. So these three components of meaning are sort of the match up with the three components of realness that that I guess Plotinus talked about and Augustine talked about. But again, it seems it's more about meaning, viability, salience to us,
right,
rather than just pure reality. And that, I don't know, I think that's why say something's more or less real? Why not just say it's more or less meaningful? Because you're right, like Nick said, if you're saying it's more or less I can't remember if Nick or John, but that it gives sort of weight to it when you say it's real. But if we call it real across the board, just in different ways, then we can say they're equally meaningful or similarly meaningful, similarly important to us. It's not that one is less important. It's just maybe less salient to us. I'm not sure if I'm sending this out.
Well, but salience and importance are very closely related.
Right. No, but that's what I'm saying. That's what we say. It's what we care about, right?
Yeah.
So we care about. So there might be more than the.
Okay, so yeah, there might be a way in which to disharmonize our almost like innate sense of that which is real has greater importance than that which isn't real. Like that which is ontologically real has more importance than that which is not. If these are the three necessary things to psychological well-being: coherence, significance, and purpose. None of those three kind of require an ontological reality behind them. They can be like entirely subjectively based, and so we can still achieve that psychological well-being.
Right, because that's about meaning, not well-being. But yeah, and meaning is subjective, right? It's subjective to us.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's, I don't know, at least for Vervaeke, he brings in how there's the relational aspect to meaning as well, where like it's, I mean, it might be
imposed on, and you're also imposing, and it's
like there's, I mean, sure, there's a way in which I'm interpreting the word or the letter CAT to mean cat. And because I've been raised in English, this is a subjective process where I'm interpreting those three letters into the image of a cat. But there's still those three letters that are out there as well. So like, sure, you can say that the semantic meaning of like what those letters represent is entirely subjective. But I mean, I guess, yeah, it really brings down the question of like, what is the referent to meaning? Is it the intention of the other person that is communicating? Is it the actual reality of the object itself? Is it just our own subjective interpretation or reception to whatever it is that we're interacting with?
There's a loop in here too, which is that you eventually have to deal with the fact that the objective world, whatever it is, makes the subjective. So at some point there's some bridge where you have to weight the subjective at least as much as the objective, because it's literally part of it. You can't actually divorce.
Well, that's sort of what Augustine Augustine does, right? He says what Augustine puts together as meaning is to have a nomenological order that connects us to what is real, a normative order that connects us existentially to what is good so that we can become better, and a narrative order that tells us how we can move forward through history. So it's sort of all three of them together in a loop. And you need sort of, each one leads to the other. I think he said they all work together like axes in space rather than being separate. And it sounds a little bit like what you were talking about just now.
And going just a step back where it's to my earlier point, I think that the psychological well-being or the feeling of meaning within an individual is sort of a necessary prerequisite to building up some sort of society. So there's a way in which, like, if like our goal is to build a happy society or even a society in general, then it has to have this foundation or like these components to it as its foundation, just for any sort of, well,
to be functional.
To be functional.
Now, when you say has to, or do you mean like this is one way to do it? Because there could be others.
Well, it depends on how malleable I guess human beings are. Like, if there is a way in which human beings can live without a coherent, say, philosophy for themselves, or a coherent system of meaning, then it could be the case that you could build a society entirely off of that. And whether or not this will be able to persist across time would be, I guess, more up in the air until it could be proven otherwise, I guess. But, and so I think that is kind of like, there's certain qualities to what we consider most meaningful. So like kind of what you were bringing up, Nicholas, so like we might say that quarks are more real than atoms because maybe they have a longer lifespan than atoms, or atoms are more real than molecules because molecules can kind of be destroyed in some sense into their base atoms.
Except is the brick more real than the house because the brick pre-existed the house?
Well, if that's kind of like our system of determining what's real, is like that which is like the house is a emergent property of the bricks being shaped in such a way, in the same way that the brick is an emergent property of the atoms being shaped in such a way, and the atoms
is the house an emergent property of our mind who sees the connections between these bricks in a functional way? That's the other option.
Yeah. You could, that as well. But anyway, the point I was making is like one definition it seems that we have for what is real in regards to ontological reality is that which persists across time. Like something that dissipates, it like
right. But right, no, I get that, but can you, but again, why are we saying more or less real and not just real or not real? Like something that doesn't persist, it's real for a time, and then it's not real. But it's not less real. It's just...
I guess it would be based off of our normative or like our salience recognition, because like I want to know what does persist across time so that I can build a foundation upon that.
Right, but that's salience and viability more than real. That's I think what I'm getting at. Like I think it's that what is more real to me, what is more real to you, is sort of what we're talking about. You know, that the more integrated, the more we get it, the more we grasp it, the more real it is to us. But that doesn't mean it wasn't real before, and it doesn't mean, and it may be wrong. We may be wrong. It's real to us, but it may not actually be real. I guess what I'm saying is I think realness should be objective, whereas our understanding of the integration of something is very determined upon us. One moment we can have our understanding of this integrated relationship, and the next moment we don't, and vice versa. But it's our understanding of what is real, not what is real.
Right. Okay. So here's where we can, I guess, get into Galileo, because Vervaeke brings up the interesting point that there's this shift that kind of occurs with Galileo, where he recognizes there's the mathematical qualities or aspects to reality, where like you can chart the parabolic arc of or maybe it wouldn't be a parabolic arc, but the swing of a chandelier, or you can measure the speed of things rolling down an incline. Right. You can chart the skies, and there's this distinction that's being made that Vervaeke doesn't go into it particularly, but there's a lecture I listened to recently that had to do with Galileo about how Galileo kind of, in order to build the foundations for science, made a clear distinction between what are what are aspects of consciousness, such as qualia, value, color, other things like that. And then what are the aspects to the objects themselves? Like, what is their spatial relation? Like how wide they are, how thick they are. What is their position in time and in space? And making that clear-cut distinction between what exists inside the object and what exists inside the subject. Oh, Tyler's coming in. Hi, Tyler.
Great. Hey, Tyler.
And so, yeah, your I guess normative position you're taking is to say, okay, we have this term real. Let's keep the term real only in regards to what is objective, because there's going to be these other aspects that don't necessarily require their foundation inside the objects themselves. In fact, if we were to try to found the qualitative aspects to things inside the objects themselves, we would kind of run amok, because there's going to be disagreements between the things. So like if I have a durian fruit and I'm me being a Westerner will be like utterly disgusted by the smell and the taste. And so so it would be a negative fruit for me. Like, I don't want that near me. But if you have somebody from southern China where this is like a delicacy and very expensive, this would be something of a high qualitative value. And so, like, if we were to try to like build some system of objective values for things, we would come up with all these like disagreements between, okay, this is both not positive in value and also is positive in value. And so it thus doesn't work in the
right. Though I would say there, like, even though it's two subjectively different experiences, I would still say the experience for each is real. Like you have a real experience of a negative sense of smell reaction, and the other guy has a positive sense. So both of those are real feelings that you had.
So it's still, it's just where, it's where we're placing the referent to these experiences. We're not placing it in the object itself. We're placing it into the subject, you could say the subject is an object, but that's that's I would say, like you're the subject are an object. Like I wouldn't quite say, like, when I say it's objective, I mean that it exists independent of opinion. So you have a bad sense of smell of this fruit that exists. You have that. I can't just think it, and I can't just think, oh no, you have a good sense of smell of that. Like, objectively, you had the bad sense of smell. I can't just form a different opinion of that. Sure.
It's still objectively true that you had that subjective experience.
So there's a way in which it like makes sense to have this kind of categorical distinction between the subject and the object, because there would otherwise be all these disagreements and some sort of fundamental divide in the law of non-contradiction being violated, or some people that are objectively wrong. Like, okay, durian is a good fruit and all the Westerners are wrong about it.
Well, and there we would be right or wrong. You could say objectively it's good because it's healthy for you. It has positive effects on the on the body. Versus I don't know, poison, which is objectively bad for you. But welcome, Tyler.
Insofar as poison, it could be objectively good for you depending upon your goals. Right. So, like, if you're about to be taken into a Nazi death camp or something like that, then
or if you have cancer and you need chemo and the poison can kill it.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Hi, Tyler.
Hello, how are you?
Great. Thanks. Glad you could join us. And I don't know. I think Nick may have stepped away. He's
I'm
there.
here. I'm just trying to get my internet to work.
Oh, okay, great. We've been having
I-
a great discussion about meaning. I don't know if you have been following along.
I've got a sick kid snoring over here in the bed. So if you hear any soft susurrations in the background, that's what's going on. I was able to listen to some of it. Yeah, particularly I was just catching the end of the question about what real is, how to define it, or at least how to use it in these kinds of philosophical musings, which I think is important to get a grasp of, particularly because these kinds of battles that we wage over the meanings of words seem to extend far longer than they should and be recapitulated a little too often, perhaps. We make mountains of molehills in a very metaphorical sense. Anyhow, so I sat down, and as I was preparing to join the conversation, I was just drawing some stuff as you guys were chatting away. I want to share this real quick.
Sure.
Just to elucidate some elements of what I was thinking about regarding what is real. And let's see. Okay. Is that showing?
Yep. Oh, hold on.
Okay.
The text is a little small. Oh, that just this is a shared whiteboard. That's fine.
Yeah. All right. So you've got right here in the middle. This is the observer. This is your eye, right? And this is representing someone observing something. It's hidden behind this kind of veil of ignorance. I don't really know what it is. This is Kant's division of the noumena and the phenomenon and all, but there's this object that we're perceiving. I just kind of ruined it, but it was a triangular shape. But there's a thing that's being perceived, and there's an eye that's perceiving it. And then you can kind of think of this as the information passing through the eye, and then on the left-hand side, it's coming into the kind of the semantic space of understanding, right? So this is showing the two processes with regards to processing information of apprehension and then comprehension. And the meta element of the whole picture, let's say, and I'll go into regards to like these other things I have on the left, but this whole process that's actually occurring is in fact the thing that is most real, right? And then it's somewhat akin to the cogito argument with Descartes. But the question of
the experience itself is most real. Is that what you just said? Was that what you were saying?
So right. Well, I'll just elucidate a little bit more. So that there is, let's say there's a triangle and we're looking at it. Okay, we see it. You're looking at one right now, in fact, on the screen, right? You see it? There it is. Boom. You have a word for it in your mind, triangle. But you have also these other conceptions that you can include that represent a gap in what it is you're actually seeing, right? It could, in fact, be a kind of skewed perception of a tetrahedron, right? Or a prism. And that's what these other words represent. And so your understanding of different dimensions and rotations in space and the way that topologies look at, from different directions allows you to understand that there are gaps in what you can say about this thing that you're looking at, right? And this gives you a bit of an epistemic confusion with regards to what you can attach a label to, right? How much information you can derive and attach to it. And I've kind of got them connected here in terms of categorical comprehensions. This is basically a bifurcation that's occurring because you're injecting conjecture of whether or not there's an added dimension. Anyhow, and then so you can consider this motion through time, let's say. But the problem with trying to determine what things are real is this thing that you're looking at, the triangle, is always changing, right? And the words that you're using to describe things, in fact, are always changing and always being argued over, right? But the fact that all of this is happening and continues to happen, that is what is most real. That is what is real, right? And
sorry, the problem,
no matter what,
the act
no
of
matter
cognition,
what this object, what's that?
The act of cognition, of perception, of thought is what is.
Well, but also the object that is external to the comprehension. So it's
okay, right. So what happens is once you've derived this initial base understanding that something real is occurring in this process of apprehension and comprehension, regardless of the error factors which are occurring on either side of the eyeball there, you start to derive confidence in the fact that there is something occurring on either side of the eyeball, that there is a mirror, right? There's a looking glass, but there is Alice somewhat on both sides, right? Something's going on. And that's just in terms of like philosophical grounding in terms of what real is, right? So you can start to
but again, why would you use most here, and why aren't they just, why can't we say there is an object there that we may not be perceiving in all its facets, plus we have this process going on of perceiving it and this identity and so on, that they're both real?
Yeah, well, this brings up something that John raised, which is a great, I think, element of what is real, and that is persistence through time, right? That which is most consistent, it's most reliable. And reliability is also a way you can conceive of something like translatability. It's infinitely translatable through time. And so at the very least, it's moving through the time dimension if it's persistent.
There's
but what
also... No, go ahead. Well, this might be for a later edition, but there's also a I guess, definition that Paul Vanderklay has used actually in conversation with Vervaeke of considering what is most real as that which colonizes, that which so you can't necessarily deny pain, because when you interact with something, that pain colonizes you to change the way that you act towards it. So if it's a porcupine, if you touch a porcupine, it's going to make you react and move away from it, making it sort of an involuntary action for you. Same way that you can't exactly ignore the sun, because it colonizes the very, what we build our foundations upon. Like we if the sun suddenly ceased to exist inside our phenomenology, then we'd be straight out of luck in a lot of ways.
We think.
But we can also colonize the sun by developing nuclear fusion.
True.
Right?
Or are we colonizing the sun, or are we?
We're meeting the sun.
In a sense, getting the. I don't know if it's where we got it, but there is a sense in which we are colonizing the pattern that is represented.
I see. We're like using the sun for our own purposes. But sorry, that was a side topic. Continue with what you were saying, Tyler.
Or is the sun using us for its own purposes? Or are we the offspring of the suns and all of their weird machinations throughout eons of time, and compressing nuclear fuel into strange shapes that eventually can produce this, right? What's up with that, suns? What are you doing? What's really going on there, stars? Huh? Tell me.
Anyway, but Brett made a good point that using persist across time doesn't why do we need to say it's more or less real? Why not use real as sort of a binary qualifier to an object?
Well, okay, so you start to remove
real or it's not.
If you remove a few things, you just start to see where the foundations are, right? So if you look on the right side of that eyeball, if the object itself stops persisting through time, then you have nothing for any reference to attach to.
It's no longer real, you could say. It's no longer real, but it was real.
Okay, so we'd have to start talking about theories of time perhaps at this point, but we don't want to go there.
No, but I think we can leave it to like what John was just saying. I was saying
you're talking about a memory,
either real
yeah.
or not real, not more real or less real. We could say it's more or less salient, or we could say
So
we have
what we're
more
talking about is
understanding
the
of what is real.
cessation. We're talking about the cessation of the information coming in through the eye, coming in through the senses. That's what we're talking about. And so what you're now relying upon is memory, which is the cycle occurring inside the observer.
No,
Or
but I'm talking about
now
more
that
that there is an object, whether or not we perceive it or not. Like if we close our eyes, I can't see you anymore, but you're still there, right? Even though the information isn't coming to my eye, I may not know you're still there. I may not have as much reason to believe you're still there, but you are still there. So my knowledge of what is real is not the same as something being real.
Or even the experience of it being real, because like
right.
you said, even as you close your eyes, and you've brought up before how you have very weak like visual memory
in my mind.
Yeah.
I don't see images in my mind yet.
Yeah. So even like, sure, phenomenologically speaking, or like within your within your conscious experience, Tyler's face is there. Yeah, I guess I don't know. This seems almost like we're referring to differing things. Like sometimes we're referring to the experience of an object. Sometimes we're referring to the object itself. Sometimes we're referring to like the memory of an object, or
okay, all right, okay, so I mean, you can understand this if you just slow it down, right? You have to slow it down and kind of just parse it out as you're experiencing these discussions. All the words you just said were concepts that we can look at one at a time, right? Like, and look at, like, what is it? It's the cycling of the memory. So running a memory is reapprehending, it's remembering, it's reassembling a recollection of what was being initially input, right? So it's a cyclic process, but it's essentially reapprehending, right? So I mean, from that basis, you can build all of this, right? And in terms of like your conscious awareness of things and how you are shaping and molding reality, it's actually related to the way that we alter memories directly. And the function that consciousness has on the apprehension of information itself.
And like a false memory can have a very real impact on you, even though you're remembering something completely wrong, but your memory of it can
well,
have...
I would I would wager that most childhood lives are spent completely built on false memories and imaginations, essentially, right? Lived in playland, and I think the first thing we do, at least in my own experience, my children, is learn how to tell a fib, right? Did you do that? No, right? They know how to tell me no before they know how to tell the truth right away. That had to be like allowed to happen, right? I had to say, no, you can tell me it's true, and then it was allowed to come out, but it was first enclosed. And this is actually a good, I think, component of a good description of what is real. And this has to do with how we generate lies, right? Or why we generate lies. Yeah, because what we want to be real is related to what we value, right? What is capable to be utilized within us, what is able to be processed within us in a valuable way, to be run through circuits that make us go, wow, we like that, rather than circuits that make us go, I don't like that.
All right. So again, we're differentiating between what is real and what we know is real, or what we believe is real, what we perceive to be real. There's a sharp line there. They don't know. We try to match
everything.
Them up.
Okay, so essentially, the way I'd like to define it is everything that is apprehended is real.
In some way,
the words that we use to describe it are what are more or less accurate in other modes of understanding, right? So their translatable capacity. In other words, the more real you define something, the more translatable it is into other modes of understanding, other frameworks.
But right? Why is something that's not apprehended less real?
What do you mean?
well, you said the more we apprehend something,
Mm-hmm.
the more real it is. But something, we could have no idea something exists. Let's just say there's something on the far side of the universe that we have absolutely no way of assessing, knowing it's there. We have no way of knowing it's real, but
Right.
it's there. And no one, at least no one around here, has perceived it in any way. But we wouldn't say it's therefore not real. It's not relevant to us because we don't know about it. It's not viable. It's not salient for us. But it's still
Well,
just
right.
as
But
real.
listen to the way. Okay, just again, slow it down. Listen to the words that you're using. Something is out there, right? You won't be able to use any more descriptive language
Right.
that is translatable into other frames like instrumentation in science, lexicography for descriptive analysis, like of characteristics and a propositional analysis of what the object is and what framework you're using to understand it. Is it a stellar object? Is it some weird metaphorical thing that you think exists at the edge of the speed of light?
Is it an alien?
Is it aliens? Like, what are we talking about here, right? So the more that you describe it, the more that you perceive it, the more you apprehend it, the more you'll be able to flesh it out into these languages, to these words that give it shape, that can be used to be given shape in other things. And those shapes, in fact, are, according to our own uses, all minor variations of these little lexicographies that we developed for concepts in our minds, right? So like outside, there seems to so in other words, I could have an apple, right? And the singular nature of the apple, right, can be infinitely multiplied into the multiplicity of words, right?
No,
and
I'm
this
not,
gives you an
sorry.
interesting concept of a relationship between how we have a descriptive analysis of what is objective and what is subjective.
No, I'm not disagreeing, I think, with anything you've said, but I'm just wondering why we call that, again, why we call that perception. You said what is perceived
Todd, sometimes
as real.
I feel like you're disappointed that you don't disagree with something I say.
No. When I say that, I'm saying that's I guess I'm saying that's not quite what I was getting at.
I know. I got it.
Yeah. No, I'm never. Although I do like. I do think it's more interesting to talk about.
You like a good wrestle.
But agreement's great.
I want to try and get into Plotinus's understanding of what is real, and so I drew this little image. Let me see if I can get to it. Let's share. How do I do this? Oh, share. There we go. All right. Can you see that with the circles, everything?
You make the best graphics.
Not
that Tyler's scratching isn't good. Mine would look way closer to Tyler's than yours.
I was just copy and pasting. All right, so understanding Plotinus's and I guess kind of the ancient understanding of like what is real and whatnot. It's funny because like Vervaeke described it, and I had read this book from an Eastern Orthodox icon carver, Jonathan Peugeot, which Vervaeke, actually no, it's his brother Matthew Peugeot, that had kind of this very same model that he was using to describe like reality within, of where you have, see in blue, we have the least constitutive parts of matter or what is real as that which is like potential. So this is kind of this understanding of, okay, there is the one, which is kind of in heaven above, which is in yellow. And then you'll have what is kind of below that within green, you'll have, say, the gods or the angels. And then below that, you might have persons. And then below that, you'll have like matter. And then underneath that, potential as well. So like the blue there representing like water. Like water itself has no form to it. It is just chaos where it can be moved and transitioned through time to do whatever, and like there's actually a connection between time and water. But anyway, just trying to think about like reality using this kind of ancient framing where you have the potential, like everything is made out of potential. So like, while it is true that I don't have a child at this point in time, it is true that I could have a child if I go about acting in such a way, getting a wife, and having a child. That is certainly,
you don't. It's not technically a requirement to have a wife, but there's
sure.
other technical requirements.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
Well,
No.
if I want to have a child persisting across time,
No. Yeah. Right. But see, you're starting to develop the particularities of what a reality would look like, right, and how it would be constrained, right. That's exactly what you're trying to depict there.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, there are multiple ways in which I could achieve the end of having a child. I was simply referencing one viable pathway in order to do so.
I was just having fun.
Yeah. All right. And then, okay. So, okay, what Vervaeke brought up with Plotinus is like, in order for us to even say that something is something, like if it fits within a category, it has to have some sort of shared similarity between something else. So like the reason that we'll say that these are keys is because they share a shape, a function, what is the term that he uses? I guess the logos of a key. But
eidos?
The eidos, yeah, that's a better one that he usually uses. There's some sort of structural function to these things that gives them the category of key these can fit within, whereas the category of key this pin cannot fit within. And so there's the eidos to the thing insofar as there's a shared commonality between them.
Okay, yeah, well, this is really interesting too, because hold the pen up, right? Because you've got the object in your hand there, right? Mm-hmm. But unless you're familiar with what the object does, saying the word pin and seeing it does not give you the full description of what the thing is, right? This starts to partition that the whole different aspects of knowledge, right? So this is how you really start to this is why we have different senses, and I think, and why we have abstract reasoning on top of those senses, like stacked on top. All right, and it's related to the picture that you've got here, by the way, right? This, when you look at it in this way, essentially what you're doing is you're stacking it in systems where they're interrelated with each other, right? Within some direct relationship in some direct way to some other system, right? It has to be explainable in terms of its relatedness to the whole. But each of those systems can be stacked within the rest.
Right, they're called layers of abstraction. We can look at them at different layers of abstraction. We can look at them as
not just that you can, but the fact that it's capable, right? That it's capable. Mm-hmm. Anything is capable of being constructed within a set of some other thing, right? Or as a member of some set. So it's fascinating.
Okay.
Aspect of reality, right? That there is this. I don't know. It's like
I'm thinking I'm getting a better understanding of like what it like. I think Nicholas actually brought it up quite well. Is like the religious worldview is looking forward into the future, and so if you think about matter in regards to it being potential to be used either for good or for ill, towards some sort of end that may or may not be achieved, that is sort of a forward-looking thinking, where kind of like Vervaeke discussing agape, where you look at a person not in regards to their current position of being destitute or sick or something like that, and you treat them in such a way that they're capable of growing out of that into something greater than they were even prior to that, such as like with the birthing of or the caring for a child. There's that potential of a personhood within them that is not there at this point in time, because we can look forward into the future and know if we act in such a way, this will be the most likely outcome for them to become something else. And so that this is sort of the ancient understanding for what is matter. Like it's constitutive of potential. Like there is no set structure to a thing until, or like anything can be used towards the destruction or the nourishment of what we're hoping to achieve. So if it's in alignment with, say, God's will, or the circular revolutions of time, or something like that, then it will resist, or it will persist across time. Because that's the other thing I read from Matthew Peugeot's book is time is very much connected with water. So like water has the destructive capacity to tear apart things in the same way that time has the destructive capacity to tear apart things. And so I at least get it. I think have a better understanding of like the distinction that's being made between our kind of modern understanding of what matter is in regards to the here and now. It exists currently, and this is what is most real. Whereas the more ancient understanding or religious understanding is like, what is this to be used in regards for the future? Like what is this? What is the purpose to this thing? How shall we interact with it?
Well, and that's how meaningful it is. Sorry, go ahead.
Right.
We have a sense of like a distance between things that, you know, like that which is proximal, that which is close seems more real, right? That which is close in concept seems more real. That which is more abstract and distant seems more unreal. That which is close in time seems more real. That which is further, more distant in time seems more unreal, more uncertain, right?
Yeah, that's
we
the
have
thing.
This
like
very
the future, it is very much, it's not as certain as that which I know right now. Because like I had this pin and I can say, yes, this pin exists, but I can't say that I'm going to have a child or not, because that's something that there's a lot more effort that will be like, certainly when the time comes, I'll be able to know for sure. Oh, yes, I did, or yes, no, I did not have a child.
So I think in general, this principle is related to kind of a principle of physics. So you could just say from a pure like objective standpoint, and you know, Pod will love this, right? Like from a pure materialist standpoint, it's just matter being pushed around by inertia, whatever else going on there, right? And so that which is most real is that which is going on, that which is moving.
Oh, but you move from seems to be real to is more real, and I think there's a difference. Like I agree with the seems to be real, but things can seem to be real and not be real, and things can seem not to be real that are real.
Well, so when you say seems to be real, what it is you mean seems to be other than what you thought it to be. But at the time, you were something was seeming. So something was there, something, be it memory or information from the external world or whatever, right? Illusion, you can call it whatever you want. Something was being apprehended. That's my point. Right? There's something real
I get what you're saying,
being apprehended.
Even if we don't
you are just
know what it is.
Be more or less, you're more or less mistaken about what to call it, right?
Or what its properties are.
Well, yeah, right. So I mean, like the more descriptive you want to get, the more words you use, and the more frameworks that you employ. Right.
So can you say that like a brick is real?
I would say yes. I would say a brick is absolutely real.
Even though we're not referencing the quarks beneath it.
All right. Oh, okay. So before we get
ahead,
into that, I don't want to let go of the idea that I was about to let go. It's just the real simplest idea. Okay. If I can get it out simply. It's always such a struggle with me, man. All right. So inertia, motion through the world, is what is most real. Okay. And when you push it out into the world, because of the chaotic nature of dynamical systems, what goes out into the world, right? So in other words, like if I push my hand through the water, the reality of that motion, the objective description of that motion is related to like the topology of like my hand and the surface tension of the water and all of that inertia, right? But then as it moves through time, like as I stop the motion, as it moves through time, that energy spreads, and the capacity to recover the shape of what was real is lost exponentially as that energy dissipates into the world around it. As what was real, the inertia, what was most real as descriptive of that thing, that object in time, dissipates through the world. It's essentially being translated into other forms. That translation is kinetic energy, heat forms, right? In terms of us right now, it's incredibly complex translations of kinetic energy and, electrochemical.
But those translations are no less real, right?
Yes, those are all real. Exactly. This is all real. This is all real. Like what and how we call it is what is up for grabs.
Right? This is kind of interesting because it brings in like Galileo's usage of science in that like he's defining things in regards to their mathematical properties. So like you can kind of create a law of nature and say that because nature will abide by this law, like then this law is like most real. It is in fact, I guess to use a Vervaeke term, it is what colonizes the matter to follow in like the ball has to follow this parabolic arc. It can't do otherwise than that. So
yeah, so that's like it's juxtaposed for the dissipative structure of the water spreading and the unrecoverable structure, right? This is what you're talking about. There is the persistence of something so real that no matter who looks at it, they all describe it the same way all the time, right?
That's how we can pattern, right?
And also making predictions. Pattern. Well, so much that you can make predictions as to, okay, there's going to be this moon that is orbiting across Jupiter at this point in time, and we can observe it.
But like again, so long as the pattern of the past persists into the future. Because
yes. Okay.
If the pattern suddenly changed, the law would change. It wouldn't work anymore.
So that's actually the enormous complexity of the answer to the question of, is this brick real? Because to answer that yes simply is to employ such incredibly implicit structures, right? Is this brick real? So you have to understand what all of those words mean. And it means, is this brick real in this moment in time? What I mean by this definition
but couldn't you do it without words? Couldn't you point to the brick and say real?
This is like reminding me of the Tower of Babel story. Like, is this brick? Hand me that brick, son. And there's completely differing. Yeah, you could point to the brick. Yeah,
right. But so that what then you and I are doing in that moment is relying upon other senses, right? We're relying upon the existence of sight sense of the brick. If we grab it and hold it, we have now sense data of like pressure.
And we're using our value like towards each other. Like if you were an enemy to me and you were saying like, hand me that brick, I would know that, oh, this guy is going to use this brick to kill me with. I'm not going to hand him the brick. And so I'm going to not abide by your request there.
Right. And if he threw you a rubber duck, you would be like, what do I do with this rubber duck? Like there are these elements of, what are expectations of what things are for and how they function in the world. It all functions normally, by the way, for most of us, but doesn't always, right? And that's actually the way that we discover some of the more fascinating elements of how the brain works is when it breaks down. And when you start to use words funny, right? And when you can no longer look at something and like conceive of what it's called, for instance, right?
So, but see, even with Galileo, though, like he uses these mathematical formulas to help determine what is real. I still think there's a differentiation between what is real and do we know what is real? Yeah, and I think I think it's still an important distinction.
Yeah. There's the epistemology of what is real, and there's the ontology of what is real. Like it might be the case that there is a great deal of things that we don't know about, that still exists. You know, like there could be another alien civilization somewhere on the far side of the galaxy or something like that. And there's this whole thing that go ahead, Nick.
What's coming to mind is that it seems like one way to think of it is that the safest place to put the concept of realness is with the subjective as the referent. So that's not to say that there is not a real thing out there that it would be an accurate statement in some sense to say is real. It does mean that it is always safer to tell, to say in what sense something is real, in relation to what.
That seems
in that
to be
sense,
the
best way to use reality, right? A pragmatic basis for it is from the subjective frame.
Well, and there's probably no way to
Like
describe reality without that, right?
Without it. Well, and we're a human, so we have to deal with the fact that we're referring to, you know, the human at some level.
That seems to be like Tyler's case that he's making. But if I'm understanding Brett and also similarly Galileo, that we can use the mathematical.
I'm glad to be put in the same sentence with that's good company to be put into.
There are still the objective properties to objects that we can like measure and define and work off of. Like, in fact, we kind of require it to be worked off of, and making that separation between the qualitative aspects to reality and then the quantitative aspects to reality. So this
but
this other has part a weight to it and a dimension to it as well. Yeah.
The other part is that, right, this is going to be an ironic state or setup, but Galileo was wrong. Right? It's not the most accurate description. It's not the most accurate description to say that the sun is the center of the solar system. Right? Instead, we get the theory of relativity with Einstein, which says there isn't a center to any of it except that the center you say you're referring to. Now, what is accurate about Galileo is that understanding and making sense of our solar system as a person is a lot simpler and perhaps more beautiful mathematically by locating the sun at the center rather than the earth.
But we can say it's more accurate, that he's still wrong in some ways, but it's more accurate. Like Newtonian physics is more accurate, is somewhat accurate, but quantum physics is more accurate.
Well, this is interesting because like your kind of pushback against us was we were using real in a gradient sense rather than a binary sense.
But accuracy is a gradient sense. Real is like we're just talking about existence, right? What exists versus not existing, whereas accuracy is how close are we to figuring out what is real versus how far away from me. So the more accurate we are, the more we've hit upon what is real or reliable.
How real and measurable is gender?
Well, gender is a pattern, right? They're patterns. So you know, it's a word. It's a symbol we have for a certain type of pattern, certain relationships, just like any other word. Right?
Well,
it's an abstract. Sorry, it's an abstract concept. So we have to talk about abstract concepts sort of in their own way of reality. They're patterns more.
Like it is the referent for gender a first-person experience of, I guess their reality in which how people are, how they're treated, I guess, or how they interpret reality. Would that be like a way to define gender? In some
well, I mean,
way?
Gender identity is more of a feeling, right? Gender expression is, there is a real way that you're expressing yourself, and we identify, certain things like long hair and dresses and makeup that we tend to identify.
I would wager, honestly, that all of this stuff revolves very candidly around notions of identity, and that it represents a failure in each of their brains to resolve, as people normally do, a sense of identity with whatever regards that is. And that's across the spectrum, by the way. People don't understand their identity for many different reasons. I'm not just talking about the gender issue, but as this failure to resolve their identity continues, they identify with that failure itself, because that is what the brain does. It identifies with the
well, I mean, they would say
forever.
they have a pretty good sense of their identity. It's just not what some other people.
No, I don't think. Well, it depends on who you talk to, but this is why actually you're culturally what you're seeing happen is, as some of the identities are more culturally acceptable, it becomes necessary to further fraction the whole categorization system so that you can make yourself more unique, more able to continue playing the identity problem game.
It's tougher because, I mean, listen, there's science is fairly nascent, but you know, there are studies that show that the brains of certain trans people
no, I'm talking about something like the development of 70 genders. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, but well, I mean, that whenever anything's a spectrum, you can divide it in however many arbitrary points you want, right? So
yeah, I'm discussing the underlying pressures for why this is occurring, though. I think it's because it has to do with the underlying problems of the development of identity and why that's occurring at all.
Well, no, but your assumption is it didn't always happen.
You raised.
Sorry?
It's an interesting question that Tyler raised, like, is gender real? Because one response to that is like, gender is a term that was invented or just used first in the 60s or 70s. And it's not like,
well, no, gender's gone back. Gender's gone back hundreds of years, but maybe certain conceptions.
Gender or sex? I mean, like, yeah.
No, gender's been around a long time. I looked it up a while back.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's
maybe
been around.
Maybe I was thinking of like gender identity, I guess.
Well, gendered language and gendered structured language has been around for a long time.
Sure.
So depending on how you
that's good.
I have a link. Remind me later which traces back words through history. It's like a dictionary that traces back words through history, and you can like look up the word gender and see the different uses. Right. It's cool. Anyway, but
okay, but I guess the classification between gender and sex. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's another language game. So if you go back to the diagram that I drew, it's the eyeball in the middle. Okay, it's a triangle on the right, and it's the argument on the left over what to call it. So the question is fundamentally this: what's the shape of the thing on the right? Are we arguing about that fundamentally, or are we arguing about like what is the shape of the word that we're calling it on the left?
I agree to an extent. Like I don't tend to care too much about what. Like if we can agree on a word, I'm fine with that. But I think a lot of people though are very attached to the particular term, which is where a lot of these sort of fights over gender come to. That some people are like, no, it has to be two. Other people are like, no, it's more malleable than that. And they're both just talking about different sides of this coin. And it's just how do we classify it in order to share information?
Right. Yeah, this is kind of like what I was bringing up with like the prerequisites to a society is, at least one aspect, is a shared language. Insofar as like, and like certainly it is the case. Like maybe I can return to my image. Just there we go. For certain things, you need to have a broader language that is being shared, say in the yellow circle. But in each of your smaller communities, you're going to have further requirements for specificity. So like in a highly technical field, you're like even within philosophy, there's all these terms like etymology of words or epistemology, all these things that are not necessary to know the word, know the language when you're say in the broader society. And then once you go kind of deeper into smaller circles or communities, the shared language that is necessary for this community to persist across time is kind of necessary for that. I don't know.
And yet,
it's a
we
highly
the concepts evolve.
It's a highly useful model to apply to all reality. Sorry. I was just saying that the ancient model to reality is highly applicable to many different types of things, and it's funny because like in the book, I think it's called The Language of Creation by Matthew Peugeot, and it's Matthew spelled in a strange way, it's a French way. He returns to this kind of model for all of his like understandings of stories and realities, all kind of off of this thing. And so it's highly applicable. But of course, yeah, I guess the difference there is that it's thinking about matter in regards to it being used for a certain purpose or reason or function, which is dependent upon, I guess, the shaper of the thing. So this. Sorry, you want to
I mean, imagine a lump of clay, John. What can you do with a lump of clay?
Right. Yeah, you can
make a Prometheus or something, right? Like what can you do? Yeah. So that's the philosopher's stone, really. That's our consciousness. It's the capacity to transmute one thing into anything. That's I think the very nature of consciousness itself is the capacity to translate things. That's transmutation. It's transforming a thing into another shape.
And this kind of goes into Paul Vanderklay's description of what is real, is that which colonizes. Is using it in a, I guess.
Sorry, what do you mean by colonize there? You've said it a few times, but do you mean like in a way of conforming, like Aristotle used?
Like when I look at an apple, when I look at a bright red apple sitting on a table and look away from it, I can't like convince myself that it is some elephant looking creature, right? When I look back to it, the very presence of it, the fact that it is pushing light off of it into my mind, it's like forcing the neurons in this thing to structure itself in a particular way that it looks like that.
And that's what colonizing. That's colonized.
The apple colonizes your subjective reality.
Yeah, the existence, the hard existence of the apple is so substantial and so integrated within the functionality of my own sense organs that it reproduces consistently, with inertia, with conceptual inertia over time, with persistence. That thing.
Okay, so yeah, I'm kind of saying like this is a definition of reality that like fits purely within a phenomenological world. Like if something does not exist phenomenologically, like that it doesn't exist in somebody's reality that they're existing within, then it's less real. So like the alien civilization on the other side of the galaxy is not real because it does not colonize our world in any way that we're aware of, unless we were like
you can do a weird kind of inversion there, because you can do something like, so like you can very vaguely describe aliens over there, haha, but you could also do this incredibly detailed description of aliens that perfectly matches human beings, and then just reverse the imagination that there's an alien out there that's you imagining yourself. So the reality of you being is just as strangely odd that it is real as you're imagining it being.
But are we just talking about salience here? Like, isn't that what salience means? Like that. Like, why do we need real
salience? Okay, so salience is where salience is most persistent and most available within the environment around you, the most local. And that's what I was talking about.
In your attention, something can be really persistent in the environment around me, but if I don't notice it, it's not salient to me.
Well, and I think the problem we are running into is that you can't, in any real way, divorce the concept of reality from the subjective frame that's using it. And so we're always trying to give things reality outside of ourselves, and then we run into a problem because we cannot do that without referencing ourselves at the same time.
No, except like, look, God either exists or doesn't. I don't tend to believe in God, but God may exist. Whether or not God's relevant to me So
Yeah, but that's
like,
just as sensible as saying something like bricks either exist or doesn't, right? So
right.
it's the same thing. I'm going to have to ask you to unpack the implicit structures underneath that for like 10,000 years before we get to a concept
But
of
there still
what
may be a
on earth you
being
mean
out
by
there,
brick or
whether I
God.
understand it or not. That being
Well,
may
I mean
exist.
that if you refer to brick, I know what you mean. If you refer to God, I know what you mean. They're both pretty persistent.
As concepts.
Right.
The concepts, yeah, that's the abstract concept part of it, right?
Yeah. Well,
and that's
okay,
still
right,
different.
so
like my concept of a brick is different from the brick
if
itself.
our base conception of reality is based on the persistence of these things being attached to things we don't really have access to, but which we are trying to use our senses to probe, then the persistence of the concept of God is something we should seriously consider as an element of something out there, which our consciousness, which is probing, it won't give up. It just won't give up, right?
I guess
It's
my
like,
problem with linking this to our perception is that it leads to what I think a lot of people do kind of make, I think, this mistake by saying, because I can't figure out if it exists, it must not exist. And I think that's a dangerous proposition. I think it can lead to just assuming things don't exist just because we don't know about it, just because we don't have access to it right now. And that
yeah.
can be very wrong. So,
well, you have various levels of epistemic uncertainty, right? So you have your knowns, your unknowns, your known unknowns, and your unknowns unknowns.
It's more than
right?
that.
You have all
It's
these various
fallacious.
shades.
It's fallacious to say, because I have no perception of X, that X doesn't exist. X is not real. It's not salient to me, but it may very well be real.
Yeah. So, but again, so this is what's interesting about it, because there, you are saying it's not real. So I think what that means is, in other words, you're saying I'm apprehending this thing, I'm perceiving it, and someone's describing it as this, but I don't think that's the case. I think there's an implicit structure underneath, which means it's actually this, and you'll have another name for it. And it could be like illusion or whatever, but you could have this very elaborate structure underneath that you were saying it is something else, but it is still real.
Sorry, Nick, you were trying to get in, I think?
And what I'm talking about is, can you hear me?
Yep. Yeah, we
okay. What I'm talking about is that this works, that cuts both ways. So if you can't say what is real without bringing in the referent of the subjective frame, likewise, you cannot say what is not real without bringing in the referent of the subjective frame.
Sure.
Oh, it's even worse, right?
In both senses. It's not, I know what is real because of me, and then I get to say what isn't real because of me. It's rather, I have to do it within the relationship to me. So I can say, I can make a statement like, I've never perceived God, therefore I believe God is not real. That's very different than saying God is not real. Do you see the difference?
Yeah, because there you're separating whether X is real versus do I know or do I believe X is real? And I agree with that completely.
Well, so if we can just append a minor attach, we can attach one bit to that statement that makes it true. My conception of God is not real. See, if they make that statement, then we can say, that's true.
Yeah, and all of this is better. I think now we're in agreement here. So which is great. I like disagreement ending in agreement. That's the best. That's the best. But you know what? One topic I did want to get to. I want to get here. Let me put it out there so we can remember to come back to it. This whole relationship between love and reason that Vervaeke talks about, which I must admit I don't get that concept. So I want to hear. You can finish what you're saying, John, but I'd like to come to that before we. We
can go right into that right here. Like. Okay, so from the Aristotelian understanding, there's the things follow their end, their telos. So the acorn turns into a tree, even though most acorns don't actually turn into trees. And the reason that they follow such
hold on.
pathway.
Hold on. All right. Okay, just a quick aside.
Mhm.
And this is just a very, very strange probe into the uncertainty of possibilities, right? So this is Nick's point, right? So the unknown unknown category is exponentially so, I mean, just explosively combinatorially huge. You can't even begin to conceive of this. So if the universe isn't truly infinite, and if it's truly combinatorially capable of reconfiguring itself over and over and over again, then every piece of matter that's ever existed has been an acorn forever at one point or another. Forever.
So like, say
Refiguring
there's an
itself.
acorn that a squirrel eats. So he turned that matter from an acorn into his own material.
In the Ouroboros cycle of eternity, true eternity, when you really start to conceive of infinity, like every reconfiguring itself over and over again, that means every piece being every other piece in every other position. Okay, so that means everything would be an acorn. And if that continues forever, then, you know, there you go. So this is a strange notion of what is possible, and what it is even meaning to use language to describe what is real. It is just to bring in a phrase, it's an economy of language. It's a way that we use to describe what is persisting locally, right? Because in order for me to truly accurately describe the existence of this bottle, I have to use so many words and so many implicit structures, and then the explanations of those structures and frameworks to make sense of this thing totally, in order to make sense of it. And like, if I were to try to explain that to someone 10,000 years from now in an alien culture, what would I need to give them in order to give them a concept equivalent to what's in my mind? The existence of the English language, how, you know, various plastics are made. I'm not sure what particular
have you guys, oh, what's the movie when I was a kid? It's the movie where a pop bottle, I guess, falls out of a plane or something and hits.
Oh yeah, the gods must be crazy.
The gods must be crazy. Yeah, yeah, that's right. In that, like, yeah, what if you have no concept of this bottle? And
so language seems to be a very economical reconfiguration of a locally real space.
Yeah, that's what I was just saying about that. If like we can say the brick is real, but the brick is a component to a mountain, 50 years in the past or something like that, and which used to be sand and gravel and or not gravel. Well, it depends on the brick, I guess.
Minerals and various.
Yeah, so we can say the brick is real if we're only referencing the thing that exists in the here and now. Like, sure, this assortment of rock.
What we mean by a brick is this particular configuration of atoms and particles and molecules that have a particular relationship, and it's not noise. It's not random. There's a real relationship. They really are interacting with one another.
There's an actual referent there that exists in this present moment in time. Whereas,
well, in fact, the various characteristics of that thing and how they integrate with other aspects of our lives or even our senses seem to give it more realness, right? So the very fact that you know that bricks can be used in building, you've seen them in buildings, right? You've actually seen pictures of them. All of that contributes to your willingness to believe that bricks are a thing, and that the word brick refers to that.
Right.
Yeah. I gotta admit, I wasn't too. I wasn't exactly tracking Vervaeke's kind of transition from the Augustinian view of love into the Aquinas view, or Thomas Aquinas view of love, into the I guess the usage of from William of Ockham of like will. There's like, because I don't know, it seemed like, at least from my understanding, will as being the thing that colonizes or takes the form to, like, puts into a form to nature. I don't know, it didn't seem that much of a digression from the previous understandings.
When I was
Yeah, I
younger,
mean,
I thought
Mm.
I thought love was attraction to the opposite gender. But as I aged, and certainly after marriage, and certainly even more so compounded after becoming a father, love is work. It's effort. It's energy put into a system in order to bind things closer together. That's what it seems like to me now.
Sorry, say that
And
again.
it's not just the feeling associated with it, with all of those embodied behaviors.
It's also
Sorry, just
Yeah,
repeat.
yeah.
Love is
things
the.
apart.
What was that, Nicholas?
I didn't catch that, Nick. What?
Yeah.
It's also the thing that splits things apart.
Mhm.
If
Yes.
you are a being of one, then love is to make something other than you.
I mean, frankly, it's
And
that
to
love
allow
is
it.
used in all sorts of ways, like very, very different ways. This
Yeah.
word has so many different definitions.
Well, okay, so I want to tie that in with the anagogic sense of rising above and then bringing things together, because that seems, I mean, even perspectively, that's what we're doing. So when I look at something with my two eyes, I'm bringing into one disparate things, disparate concepts or things in my vision, and bringing them into one in this mind here, right? I'm gathering them together.
And that's an expression of your value towards the things that you have. Like there's
at
a
the
reason
very
you're
least,
facing this way instead of over this way.
Right. I'm deciding that there is value in looking at it and conceiving of it and bringing it into my mind and manipulating the things that I think are associated with it. And that is, we don't use the word love to associate with those, mundane tasks, let's say, and everything. But desire and attention are very basic aspects of what consciousness are, and love dominates these fields, right?
Mm-hmm.
That which you love, you stare at continuously and wish to feed into your mind, and for it to always be there, present, apprehending continually, right?
Well, then
Not even comprehending.
Augustine says that the heart of reason is love. That he thought his addiction to sex was because his capacity to love was damaged.
Yeah. So what happens is ugliness is something you don't want to look at. Okay. And this is why I think reason is attached to it. So ugliness is something that you don't want to look at. And therefore, looking at competing concepts in your mind, looking at competing frameworks and notions in your mind without knitting them together, without making sense of them, without reasoning through them, is to stare at ugliness and to not love it.
But
To
I can
love
use
it,
my
you must reason.
I can use reason to achieve horrific results as well. I mean, I can
But
use
you
reason
are
for evil.
right, but you are integrating something within you. You have a desire you wish to achieve, and you are integrating something within your mind and being to achieve that end, right?
So sorry, so the integration is sort of that agapic love, the integration of
Right. Yeah.
No, I think
and
it's meaning that, like, if you were to use your reason for evil, the reason you're doing so is due to some sort of desire that you have within you towards the ends
Yes.
that you're hoping to achieve.
But I can use reason in a lot of different ways. So I can use it to help to achieve a goal, but I can sometimes I like just having debates. I like reasoning through issues that I don't care about. Sometimes I'll hear something that intrigues me. I have ADHD, so I get sort of things catch my attention. I'll just like to reason it through, even though I really don't care about the issue, but I'm using
reason it through to where? I mean, you don't get to the end and you don't say, that's a beautiful contradiction. I think I'd like to let it sit there. You say, I want to make sense of this. I need to bring them into unison. Right. I need to integrate these concepts. I need to chuck one of them and stare at the other one, because that one's a more beautiful concept, one that makes more sense to me.
So it's just hard that we use love to mean this. Like, I get that concept, and when you say it that way, I get it. But I don't naturally associate that with love. So I think we just have a different view of love. And
I kind of like what Tyler brought up. Like, love, it has to do very much with like what we're putting effort towards or what we're working for. whereas like within kind of our modern understanding, we have a very, very subjectively based understanding of love as like feeling of affection towards a thing or
well, what do we love?
Attraction.
We love food and we love sex. Okay. I don't know what else the rest of the human population loves, but that's like what everybody around me seems to just love. Okay. There are various shades of it, but it's food and sex. Okay. And I'm being a little bit tongue in cheek here. Maybe that tongue in cheek comment was tongue in cheek.
Well, you're talking more the eros type of love, right?
Yeah.
Eros.
No, I'm just
the consumptive love.
Okay. What I'm going to point out is that if you hold evolution to be true, or any kind of structural development through time, ancestral passing on, generational transition of structure, of eidos, of structural functional organization through time, it is evident that we are persistent because of these loves, right? Our unique subjective inertia through time is wholly dependent on the existence of those two unalterable, necessary loves. You must procreate and you must consume. If you do not, life dies. It's done.
So despite maybe the drives towards food and sex were done consumptively, due to that having been done, we're capable of existing right here and now. So there is sort of an agape that has occurred even through the use of eros as a love.
Yeah. But then again, I've consumed a little too much food, for example. You know,
how do you know?
To an because it results in unhealthy aspects that I can.
Yes, but in this best of all possible universes, you could be no other size right now.
Well, sorry, in this best of all, I'm not sure. I try to like.
In this best of all possible universes.
Because this is the best of all possible universes.
Do you think it could have been some other way?
Well, okay, now we're getting to determinism and all that. That's a tricky one.
I just think that if your weight changes, it already did, as evidenced by the fact that it did, right? It did. We get stuck. Look, we're creatures of time. We get localized in the present, but it's you can also like abstract yourself out and understand these relationships with your identity. I think that are broader than just in this present moment. But maybe that's a little too abstract. But all right, so the love thing. You are alive. You exist right now. This is real. This is real, right? You're real. You're experiencing this. You're hearing me. You just nodded in response. I'm taking that as a yes signal. You like woo. The world is still fun. Okay, so everything that you ate contributed to that, and your own minuscule conceptions of whether or not they contributed or didn't contribute, or whether or not they contributed too much or to health problems or what, you have no real clue, let's say, except for, inside your mind. In reality, in the whole grand cosmos thing, if I like zoom out from the perspective of a satellite and Earth with like no morals, no dietary knowledge, nothing, all I can say is that thing shaped like pod did everything it was supposed to keep getting to where it is right now. And I think that's a fascinating way to look at things, but like, that's true.
You're sort of taking an Aristotelian approach there, sort of a telos approach.
Well, I'm just taking one a little bit scrubbed of the subjective qualities that we get localized within, right? Some egoistic qualities.
See, I would agree with you, except for the supposed to. Like, it did. It followed. There's a chain of causation that brought me to this, but supposed to sort of implies some preordained plan
or some sort of intention of the will. Yeah. So like even
but not my will necessarily.
Well, it's a causal history. It's a direct what I'm saying is I directly observed you do all of these behaviors. Like if I watched you from start, like you were squeezed out at birth from then until now, if I were an observer from space watching you, and I had no frameworks, no morals, the only thing I could do is describe what physical systems took place. And I would have to be concluding at the end, all of that was kind of necessary for this thing at the end, as it's shaped, as it looks, to have taken place, right?
Sure.
But we get locked into these narrow perceptions that are based on our own internal configurations, right? It's not, we don't usually take that framework up above. We take our own, where we're like, I'm overweight, I ate too much last night, or I like have poor body self-image, whatever, right? Like we do this crazy stuff inside our own little head. Meanwhile, the satellites up there, like, or God, right? God's perspective, right? And this is why the God perspective seems to be meaningful in a direct way for a lot of people, because it provides that meta heuristic, that continualized process of aborting this entirely subjective framework and like bumping out and saying, what about something up there? It's like this weird little like, this loop is not working, kick it out. God, kick it out. God, kick it out. God, you just keep kicking it back up into this meta heuristic over and over and over again. Yeah. You either do, it's like you end up at that no matter what, by the way. You just use a different word. It's not God, it's something like quarks.
Sure.
Right, as Nick was talking about, really leptons, or before that, the quantum.
Or Vervaeke talks about the scanning up and scanning, like scoping out or scoping down, or scanning up or scanning down. That to have an optimal grip, we need to have that bird's eye view, but we also need to have the up close view and to have the proper relationship between them.
Right. Yeah, and at some point you reach a field of abstraction or a level of particularity that no longer has any coherent interrelatedness with the systems that are immediately adjacent to it. That makes sense. And that is what is the defining element of, like, you could call it like your coherence landscape. Like you have it's like a unique distance between you and the furthest object that you can apprehend. You can actually apprehend.
So here's an image I keep getting in my head hearing the conversation, which I guess would be a kind of pseudo-Gnostic perspective, which is that you have kind of two fundamental drives. One is that which empties itself or opens itself to allow in from above. That's like the process of revelation, or like the eureka moment.
Also consumption, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and but that leads into the other part, which is you also have this drive from below, which is this building up, the building of the tower upwards. And so you can map these kind of drives onto the body. I use the Star of David because it's useful. But you can then view love as the meeting point, or the maximal point of these two overlapping drives, which is settled at the heart, which is why in every major religion you have enormous emphasis on the heart specifically as where some type of very magical thing happens, right? It's not in the head, it's not down below in the, well, different religions emphasize different aspects, but
well, I'm a big fan of the Vitruvian Man, so I like that image, right?
Yeah, well, it's funny.
Right,
I was just reminded of this image of St. Augustine, where it has the heart that's burning, and then you have, this isn't even a full image, sorry. The heart that burns towards God, and then you have God, which is also like reaching out through the sunbeams there.
Yeah,
and it's central, or I guess meets in the middle within, I guess, the intellect. Yeah, that's the better image. The veritas.
Well,
the truth.
So I mean, to Nick's point before.
I was just going to say, it goes with what you were saying, Tyler, of this kind of idea of love as a union, right?
Yeah.
That seemingly that's the point to where the union takes place, of kind of the egoic structure of the person rising up towards God, and then God reaching down towards the person, and you get this something that, you know, emerges that we have labeled love.
Yeah, well, I mean, I tie, I'm very much like you, right? I tie everything to these kind of physical foundational terms, because I do think that the motions at the bottom described by objective kind of scientific instrumentation and concepts of it do provide the best picture with which to build up intuitions, I think. But
What's
I
a
just
universal language? Oh.
What's a universal language, Nick? Oh, love.
Well, that's
okay. All
different
right.
discussion.
Yes. Thank you. Oh,
I
yes.
thought math was the universal language. Sorry, go ahead, Tyler.
No.
Music.
Okay. So love. All right, well, this is what I'm always trying to do, is I'm always trying to linguistically map concepts across frameworks. That's what my mind always tries to do. It's a this process of consilience, because what I'm taking to be true is that everyone, each unique individual, each subject is apprehending some reality, and that they're just somewhat unfaithfully transcribing it, let's say, right? They're not quite sure how to describe it perfectly, and I'm not quite sure how to even read their descriptions well, right? There's always this kind of, again, if you go back to it, there's always this dissipative quality to the integrity of the information as it goes through space, right? So it goes through space and time, you lose the coherence of the information, and therefore the trustworthiness of the verification ability of it and all that. Okay, but all right, so love is attraction, right? It's as simple as that. When you love something, you turn to it, you look at it, and then you want to go to it. You want to consume it. You want to make it a part of you. You're making a part of you with your eyes, at the very least, right? Can't help but look at it.
But then
look at your big, beautiful
that's more the
face. I can't
Eros
look
love,
away
because
from you, Pod. Look at these glasses, the way they symmetrically rim these. I don't know what color your brown eyes. There's this. You can't look away from something, right? Like that's the sense of it. And
but when you say your love
imbibing
for your child is consumptive, like it's sort of
exactly.
not, right?
Yes. Well, this is why there's something, in psychology, it's getting very late. So terms of the mother,
there you go. The Oedipus complex. And...
Yeah, there you go. The Oedipal mother.
No, that's not what I'm. It is a synonym of to consume.
Vervaeke said it. I caught it, but I'm.
Yeah. So so when I get tired, this is like the way my brain breaks. It's so funny. It's so consistent. I love it. All right. If I were to stop, I might be able to settle on it for a moment. The devouring mother. Thank you, brain.
Okay.
Haha. All right. So the devouring mother, right? This is the very nature of this concept, and this is related to the revision that Nick added to my statement, which was, and to let the thing that you love go, and also learn to love, right? So that this is this cleaving function that has to occur, because in the subjective analysis, if you yourself love to love, and then you identify with the thing that you created as also being like you and loving to love, then the rational integration of that function through time, which is what we talked about, the development of what it is to be real, right, is to let it also love. And there is this very real relationship between the nature of self-reproducing, self-organizing systems and how they're related with boundary systems and conditions, let's say. But the way that they reproduce, you cannot consume yourself. You can't eat your own children, right? You need to continually bring energy in from the outside system. And so you have to have this ability to bring in things, unify, produce an offspring, and then allow that thing to reproduce that process.
Well, our relationship to our kids is more sacrificial, whereas our kids' relationship to us is more consumptive. That's how Vervaeke has put it.
Yeah, that's exactly. It's both. It's like right on the other side, at the cusp of the Ouroboros. Exactly. And you feel as the children grow, you're actually extending along the edges of that Ouroboros, and then at some point there's this weird death fiasco as the two creatures meet uphill, and as ghosts going up and down the same mountain, like that there's this point where father becomes son and son becomes father, and Luke yells at Darth Vader, and all of that stuff just keeps happening over and over and over again, and that's the game of life, right? And it's like this weird push through time. It's happening.
Who kills Jormungandr? I forget. The world snake from Norse mythology.
Oh yeah, did you say it? It was
Jormungandr.
Jormungandr or something. Yeah, it's
one of the gods kills it, but it's part of the whole Ragnarok scenery.
Ragnarok is a mess, man. But
Brahma came to mind as well.
Mm-hmm. There's always a catastrophic collapse of some kind that brings restructuring and reorder, rebirth. Right.
I think I'm gonna have to read some Augustine to really get how he's talking about this love. I mean, how he's thinking. I mean, the fact that Augustine can have love at the top, and that it goes together, and then Aquinas changes it, and Eckhart changes it, and and Occam changes it. It seems there's all these different conceptions of it, but
I think this is why. It's because it's a persistent quality of just any system that you want to design at all. That's why I'm trying to describe it in as generic terms as possible. Anything that wants to reproduce as a kind of generational structure, in terms of like these fundamental qualities of the universe and how it functions, there are these limitations to it. You only have so much energy, right? There's entropic laws, the laws of thermodynamics. So there are only certain ways in which you can structure persistent games. And that is through the continuous flow of information and flow of energy. There has to be a flow of some kind.
Would you say a fruit fly procreating is love? Is it gapic? I mean, not really. Like, it's not just this Darwinian sense,
I think that the astronaut floating in the overview effect in space looks at the whole of Earth and says, love. That's what I think. Yes. The fruit fly to the ape, to the human, to the swordfish, to the sloth, to you name it. Like the whole process that's occurring on Earth, be it the weird parasitic things that infest. Like I've got like probably parasites living in my eye. And I've never known them. I've never shaken hands with them. We're not on a first name basis, but they've been with me for years. And they're with you, and they're with you, like all these weird little Matryoshka dolls of living systems, like stacked within each other, hardly neighbors, but embedded, right? It's very strange, but from any perspective, it seems you can change perspective and find love or hate. And that's the alternative. It's a repulsion. It's a sense of wanting to run away from something or to destroy it, to make it stop being so that you no longer have to look at it. Okay, and those are these qualities of the universe. Things come together and they either build in ever more finely tuned geometrical, structural, functional organizations into macromolecules and above, into organizations in such delicate balance, or they destroy each other. They compete for space. They compete for resources. It's these two.
Would we call entropy hate? Sorry, Nick.
I just was going to say that the competition is also part of the complexification.
Yeah. For sure. It's like the thing that causes the crazy border between those two forces.
It's like hate is, I guess the way I'm picturing it is that hate is a function of love, not an entity unto itself.
It is, right. It's the moment you define one field, you get the other field, right? You can't have one without the other. Exactly. It's polarities, right? Once you have one, you define it in terms of the existence of the other.
And to give another perspective on your question of if the fruit fly is experiencing love, one religious interpretation would be to say that there is actually no created being is capable of love. Instead, they all share in the love of God. So it is the love of God that is sustaining all of these interactions. And insofar as the fruit fly is capable of being part of God's love, then it is part of love.
Yeah,
So that
I mean,
would be another way to answer it. Is the fly itself creating, manifesting love? No, but it is sharing, partaking in God's love.
I always bring up like Jordan Peterson's example of this experiment where they determined that these rats playing and the big rat and the small rat, and if the big rat didn't let the smaller rat win a third of the time, the small rat would just stop playing. And so I think different love creatures have different capacities of, say, love. I think that's an example of sort of the bigger mouse having a sense that he has to let this younger mouse win. He's got to sacrifice himself, his win, to keep the game going, to keep the play going, is a sense of love that a fruit fly probably doesn't have the capacity. So I think there is something real, again, to love, that there are some creatures that can have love and some that sort of can't, just because they don't have the necessary intelligence or consciousness to do it.
I would form a hierarchy out of it, which is to say, I think that the fruit fly is partaking in love, but it is not able to partake in love to the same degree.
It's not even mouse. It's just not cognizant that it's doing so.
So if we're defining love as the structural functional organization of a thing to persist through time by unifying disparate systems, right?
Wait,
systems
that's the definition of reason. Sorry, of real that we've been talking about. That's exactly the definition of real.
Yes, it's wedded. You could
so
say.
To make something real is to love it. Like,
okay, but it's also very tightly wedded with to hate it. And that is the salience field. That's how we define.
Well, why would I create it if I hated it? If there's a future world.
Have you ever created anything you hated?
Well, so the problem is you can't create something that you love without creating something that you hate.
Yeah.
You cannot. This is Isaac Denison. Isaac Denison said this about, right? This is so beautiful, right? Like, what else is? It's something like this. I'm paraphrasing. What more is man than an infinitely elaborate machine to transform the red wines of Shiraz into urine, right? Like, we labor to produce. We labor to produce something like David, right? We love something into being, and then we turn it into a tourist trap, or we consume wine and piss it out, right? Like, everything that we love also becomes a waste product. This is the element of the persistent quality of the universe that I think most begets the struggle that is embedded in religion and
well, that's what I was asking about entropy. Like, we have these coming together, but entropy, we know that the nature is breaking apart. I mean, that's where everything's going. And but I'm uncomfortable calling that hate. I'm uncomfortable calling
okay, so there's a way to reverse hate through time, which becomes love, the inversion of these things, right? And that's how the majesty of, let's say, the resurrection plays out in the minds of the Christian concept of the world, I think.
I guess I can kind of understand what you're getting at here, Tyler. So, like, say you're a racist or something like that, and you had an infinite amount of love for the white race. Along with that might carry with it the implicit hatred towards somebody that's not of the white race, something like that. So that is a way in which, because you love something, there's the opposition to it is something that you hate as well.
But isn't that closely related to fear? Isn't hate more related to fear than?
It's just the development of the shadow itself. Because, okay, so if you ask the family of any highly driven individual, right? as you love something and pursue it more and more and consume the resources around you and endeavoring to come closer to it, what you build in the shadows of your mind and the shadows and the recesses of the kind of, it's really like the wake of your motions through life. What you build behind you is the shadow of your soul. Those things which were unattended to, they're opportunity costs of your energy, your energetic intentions in the world, right? You focused so intently on one thing that the dragon snuck up behind you. That's actually the story of culture, right? The things that we don't attend to, the dark corners of our room, I say in the dark, those things are what sneak up on us when we don't see them. And that's what culture is perennially trying to control. That's what they're perennially trying to structure with the narrative, those things which we let slip out of control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys want to wrap up here?
Yeah, we've been going for 2.5 hours. I think it's been a really interesting discussion. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah.
I wish my internet was more reliable, but it was very fun.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us, Nick and Tyler and Brett, and anybody who's watching over this after the fact. I don't think we had anybody coming in today, but yeah. Thank you.
The more people that watch it, the more real it will be.
But if no one else watches it, did it happen?
It happened for me at least. All right. Thanks, everybody. So next week we'll be going over episode 21, perhaps episode 22 as well. It depends on how much meat is behind it. So.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, we're getting to Luther and the Protestant Reformation.
Oh, cool. Okay, maybe we'll have to find somebody that could. I don't know. It depends. If it feels like there's some sort of subject that Vervaeke goes into that we're not qualified enough to.
Well, whole wars have been fought over that kind of stuff. So
yeah, that's true.
Meat. There's meat if you want it.
Okay. All right. Good night, everybody.
Thanks.